Hello everyone, it's Ponser here, and today we're going to be showing you how to create a 2D player movement. And as you can see, the respawn's not included. So what we'll need to do is create a player. Since we have a brand new scene here, and we can just name this player, reset it so it appears in front of us. We could double click, then we can add a sprite renderer. And here we could add the sprite of our player, obviously. I have some, this is not necessarily a good sprite, but I did bring this in randomly. It's one of my, it's my YouTube character. I don't think I have it on this YouTube, but it is on my Discord. Anyways, the point is, after we do that, we're actually gonna need a butt slider 2D, and we're also gonna need a rigid body 2D, since this is gonna be using rigid bodies to move. Okay, so after you do that, we need the ground. I have this skin color square here I can use. Let's just grab in this skin color square. So the skin color squared, -1. That's perfectly under our player. And we can name it to tanned ground. And actually, let's also add layer, right? And we'll see we have this layer called ground. If you don't have it here, if it's empty, just type ground. And as soon as you back out, select player again, select tanned ground, whatever it is that you select, you could apply the layer ground onto it afterwards. And that doesn't really change anything yet. If we hit play, for example, our player, falls right through. Actually, hold on. I forgot to add the butt glider, but after you add that, it doesn't make a difference. So we'll need to add the logic in a bit. So let's add our player movement script. Now, if you don't have your player movement script created, which you probably shouldn't, go to scripts, create, and C# script. You might not have this on a 2-column layout. I mean, you might have it on a 2-column layout, which I believe is the default. In which case, it's the same. Go to your scripts folder. If you don't have one, you could just create a folder and call it scripts, and then C# script player. Now it's gonna compile the script again, so I shouldn't have made this player script, and we're not gonna use it. We're gonna be using player movement. But as you can see, it starts with void start, void update. I already deleted those in my player movement, but we are gonna be using them. So the first 3 variables we're gonna need a variable for speed. We're gonna make that a float, and we're also gonna need a variable for jump velocity, and as well as a variable for rigid body. I'm gonna be using a rigid body 2D, and make sure to serialize them if you're using private. If you're not, just put public. It doesn't really matter, but if you make it private, just realize that you won't be able to access them from other scripts. Also, don't forget to add some float value. Yeah. Okay. So after you have this, you're gonna need your void start, which if you didn't delete, it's fine. It's whatever. RV is equal to get component and rigid body 2D. So you don't need to add like transform like a component or anything. It's just by default you put get component. It'll know it's talking about whatever this script is attached to. Okay, so now we have a reference to our rigid body. We could do void fixed update. Fixed update is usually better for physics since it doesn't matter what computer. Like I could be playing this on a potato, and the logic would still run at the same speed, basically. Although you probably shouldn't be playing on a potato. Okay, so after this, we could do if input dot get button and with button name jump. So we're using the Unity input system instead of say key codes, which is you don't have to copy this part. Again, this is like completely optional, but you'll see it's in essence it's the exact same thing. So RV the velocity we're gonna is equal to, and RV the no RV my bad vector 2 that up. So by default, we're already good. Whenever we press space, it's gonna set a print statement saying jump, and we're also gonna jump up a bit. But we wanna link it up with our jump velocity, so like that we can adjust it. Because vector 2 that up is by default just a 0 and a 1, 0 on the x and a 1 on the y. So if the reload happens, and make sure that you do have the script, everything set up. Whenever you hit play, at the bottom in our game, you can see we can't move, but we can jump. And we can jump infinitely at that, which we will be fixing later. And we also get the console. So you can do you can set this up however you want. You can, You can go to project settings, input manager, and here we have horizontal, jump. So right here it's set as space. You could change that, or you could, just use the key code. It doesn't matter. You choose how you control your game. Okay, so after we do this, we can get rid of this since I was just demonstrating that, you can set up however you want. After we do that, our next step is horizontal movement. So we're gonna do if input the get button horizontal. So this is gonna check if we're moving left or right, and it's a bool. So if I hover over this, I mean, you see it's a bool. So we're actually gonna do another thing. We're gonna do vector 2. No, it's a float actually. So float direction is equal to input that get axis and horizontal. So this will return us an actual number. All right, so now we're gonna create a float called direction, and what it's gonna do basically, if you're pressing either the A or D or left or right, it'll either be a negative or a positive, or at least that's what we're checking for with the if statement. So if it's negative, it'll obviously be moving towards the left, and if it's positive, we'll be moving towards the right. Okay, so already our thing works. You can already control yourself. You can, do whatever the heck you want. So by default, it just works. But you'll realize it doesn't actually just work because, okay, okay, this is not supposed to happen. You can turn off rotation, but do it after you arrow. Okay, so if you turn off rotation, apart from, being able to fly however you want, it's also a bit slidey, which you might not want unless you don't want your character to get stuck on, say, walls. But we have a different solution for that. So first create a physics 2D material, and we're gonna set friction over here on the right, top right, or wherever your inspector is, to 0. And then we can apply this to either the ground or the player. It won't, I don't think it makes a difference, but it might be a good idea to just have it on the player instead, since like that you don't have to apply it to new ground or anything. You can put it on the body, you can put it on the rigid body, you can put it on everything if you want. In essence, now you're gonna slide more though, so obviously we gotta do something about it. Since now there's no friction, you won't even stop. So we gotta do it in script. So if you're not pressing, because there's a bool, right? So it will return false if you're not pressing A, D, or left and right, the arrow keys. So if you're not pressing any of those, you shouldn't be moving in the first place. So we could just set the velocity to new vector 2 0, and as usual, rp.velocity.y. We don't want our If you want to stop jumping in midair, you should be able to stop jumping in midair. I mean, moving in midair, not stop jumping. So now your controller is perfectly fine now. Look at this. Look at that. No sliding. And you can stop, you can continue. It's perfect. But again, you can still, if you're satisfied with that, you're satisfied with that. But you shouldn't be, because we can still jump to infinity and beyond. Whee! Okay. And so we gotta fix that. And the easiest way to do that is to create a new bool. Let's call serialize field private bool is grounded. And this is gonna check if, you guessed it, we're grounded. So we can stay in fixed update if physics to the line cast, and it's gonna ask us for a vector 2 start and a vector 2 end. So this is where the line cast, where the line starts and where the line ends. So we're gonna pass in our transform, that position. Again, that's the position of whatever object has this script. And the end is obviously gonna be our ground check, which is gonna be a empty private transform, call it ground check. Whoops, ground check. And you need it to be serialized in this case, or public, since you're gonna need to drag in the ground check, unless you tag it or something, but that seems like pointless trouble. Ground check dot position. Since our ground check is, a transform, you can just do that position. And we're gonna do is grounded is equal to true. Obviously, if it's touching the ground now, and we do else is grounded is equal to false, because otherwise is grounded would indeed be equal to false. After this loads, we can go into our player, right click, create empty, and do ground check. You can, again, name it whatever you want. And you could even give it a tag if you want to be able to see it. I like sim gem. And we can move it below our player. And now it'll only when we're on the ground you will be able to jump. So if I'm not on the ground, I won't be able to jump. Whoops, I forgot to sign. Okay, sorry about that, guys. The reason is probably because the ground, it's registering ourselves as well. So I just do a comma inside of this parentheses, right? Do one, this thing, layer mask dot name to layer, and we did create the ground layer earlier, so we're gonna need to use it. Ground. It's pretty simple fits. You just do and is grounded. If it's not grounded by default, you don't have to do equals true. You just, now if it's not grounded, it just won't work. But while this is fine for a character controller, there are actually some neat features you can add. One thing you might notice is, first of all, let me modify our butts collider. Our player is, if our player walks to the edge, he can't jump. As you can see, this is not, so he can't jump. You probably want him to jump. So let me change this to 5 or something. And there's one easy way to fix this. Well, we can just add a ground check on the left side. Let's do -0.4. That's more or less correct. Okay. So now the problem is we don't have a slot for a second ground check, which is why we can just turn this into an array. And now we have a ground check array, and this no longer works. But just do brackets and a 0, and now it works again. But now we need to add the second one, and it's actually as simple as just copying this and adding a 1, since we'll be using exactly 2 ground checks. Now, if you want even more ground checks for whatever reason, it's again still kind of simple. Do an OR, which is just those 2 lines. Change this to 1, and already our ground check would work. We would be able to work with 2 ground checks just with that. So you could select your ground checks, or you could drag them in. Okay, now if we walk to our edge, we'll be able to jump. Look at that. I can still jump, which is exactly what I wanted. But if I slip off, I'll fall and die. It happens to the best of us. It makes sense. And you don't want to fall and die, at least not always, right? Like, I just slipped a bit. So you want to add Coyote Time, and that's actually another simple implementation. Let's first of all create a float, serialized field, private, float, call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it Coyote Time, and let's set it to 1, so that'll be 1 second. And then we could create a coroutine, enumerator. Coroutines are basically just functions. Ground is grounded, false. So this coroutine, what we're gonna make it is after 1 second, it's gonna say is grounded or false. So you're gonna return new, wait for seconds, and inside here we're gonna put Coyote Time. After the Coyote Time, you do is grounded is equal to false. And now if we scroll right back up to where we put is grounded is equal to false, and right here, instead of doing that, we could do start coroutine, and is grounded false. There we go. By default, right now, it already works. So that gives us a 1 second delay after slipping off to still be able to jump. Now, if you leave it too low, too high, people will be able to like fly basically. See? So you might want to, put it like 0.5 instead. That might be something you're interested in. Okay, so now that we have a movement, we can jump. We can add as many ground checks as we want. Well, I'll take a little bit more lines on the statement or change it to a for loop, but that's it. You can now create a 2D player. Um, of course, you gotta make sure. Oops, I forgot an important part actually. If we go here, whenever we're grounded, we need to stop all coroutines. Otherwise, this just gets rid of all coroutines on this script. So make sure that you're not running any other coroutines. Otherwise, you're in trouble. In that case, you might want to specify. But since we're only running one coroutine on this script, it's fine to just stop all coroutines. So now it shouldn't, as soon as you're grounded, you're good. You can jump right away. You probably didn't notice since you can't see me pressing down the keyboard, but there were times I was trying to jump and the behavior was a bit weird. But no, now it's perfect. It works as intended, and you can have fun. Now, if you want even better jumping, however, I do have a better controller than this, but I actually got it from another YouTube video. So I recommend you check the link in the description for better jumping, or if you need a part 2 instead, you can just ask it down in the comments. I'll make it happen.